My name is Clara, and I'm 28 years old. For most of my life, I was considered the quiet disappointment in a family that only valued volume. They never could have imagined that my dreary little hobby would one day become a matter of international importance, leading to the most public and satisfying family showdown I never knew I needed. Before I dive into how a sad prince and a sad song changed my entire world, I want to hear about yours. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you've ever felt like your passion was misunderstood or dismissed, hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. For all the new viewers, make sure you subscribe because this is a community for people who know what it's like to have to prove your own worth. My childhood home wasn't a place of warmth, but of presentation. Everything was about how it looked from the outside. Our lawn was meticulously manicured, the paint on the house was always fresh, and the smiles we wore in public were professionally polished. My mother, Matilda, was the architect of this facade. She saw life as a series of social ladders, and her primary occupation was climbing them, using her husband and children as convenient rungs. My father, George, was a man who had long ago traded his spine for a quiet life. He was successful in business, providing the financial fuel for my mother's ambitions, and in return, he was allowed to exist in the periphery of her whirlwind of social engagements, a silent partner in the family enterprise. Then there was my sister, Beatrice. Bea was 2 years older, and she was my mother's masterpiece. She was beautiful, sharp, and had followed the life blueprint my mother had drawn for her with flawless precision. She went to the right university, got a high-powered job in finance, and was engaged to a man whose family tree had its own Wikipedia page. Beatrice didn't just climb the ladder, she leaped up it, and my mother basked in the reflected glory. And then there was me. I was the smudged corner of their perfect family portrait. I wasn't awkward or unattractive, just quiet. While Beatrice was out collecting accolades and eligible bachelors, I was inside, at the old upright piano tucked away in the forgotten sunroom. The piano had belonged to my grandmother, my father's mother, the only person in my life who had ever seemed to see me. She was a woman of quiet depths, and she had been the one to show me how the 88 keys could speak a language more profound than words. When she passed away, she left the piano to me in her will, a gesture that my mother called sentimental nonsense but couldn't contest. That sunroom became my sanctuary. It was where I went to untangle the knots in my chest, to give voice to the feelings that our family's polished existence had no room for. I didn't just play music, I composed it. I wove melodies from loneliness, harmonies from quiet observations, and rhythms from the steady, anxious beat of my own heart. To me, it was the most real and vital part of my existence. To my family, it was Clara's dreary little hobby. The dismissals were a constant, a low hum of disapproval beneath the surface of our lives. They were never overt, rarely a direct command to stop. It was something far more insidious. It was the sighs from my mother when the sound of my playing drifted into her meticulously planned dinner parties. "Oh, that's just Clara," she would say to her guests, a little wave of her hand dismissing the sound and me along with it. "She does get lost in her little tunes. So melancholic." The word melancholic was always delivered with a slight sneer, as if sadness were a social disease. My father would simply offer a tight, uncomfortable smile, a silent plea for me to be less present. Beatrice was more direct in her cruelty. She would lean against the sunroom door, filing her nails, and say things like, "Are you still plinking away at that thing? Don't you ever get tired of being so gloomy?" One afternoon, I had just finished a piece I was incredibly proud of. It was complex and raw, and for a moment I felt a surge of confidence. I decided to play it for them. I found them in the living room, planning a charity gala. I sat at the grand piano in that room, the one that was purely for decoration, and I played my heart out. When I finished, the silence was heavy. I looked up, my chest tight with a foolish hope. My mother was examining a fabric swatch. My father was staring out the window. Beatrice was scrolling through her phone. Finally, my mother looked up, her brow furrowed. "That was a lot of notes, dear. A bit depressing, don't you think? People at the gala will want something cheerful, something they can recognize." The casual way she crushed that piece of my soul felt more violent than a scream. My only real audience was my friend Lena. We'd known each other since kindergarten, and she was the complete opposite of my family. She was vibrant, loud, and celebrated every part of me they tried to erase. She would sit on the sunroom floor, her eyes closed, and just listen. "Clara, that's beautiful," she would say after I finished a new composition. "It's like you're telling a story without any words. I can feel it." She was the one who encouraged me to enter a local composers competition when I was 19. I spent weeks perfecting a piece, a soaring, intricate thing that felt like my entire being poured onto sheet music. I needed my parents to sign a permission form and pay a small entry fee. I presented the form to them at dinner. My father glanced at it and passed it to my mother. She read it, and a small, pitying smile touched her lips. "Oh, darling," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "A competition? Isn't that for people who are serious about this? It's a sweet hobby, but let's not get carried away. Besides, we have the Hendersons' annual garden party that weekend. You can't possibly miss that." I tried to argue, my voice small and shaky. "But this is important to me." Beatrice snorted from across the table. "Important? Clara, it's a piano contest. It's not the bar exam. Let it go." My father just shook his head, a silent command to drop the subject. I crumpled up the form in my room that night and cried until my throat was raw. I never tried to enter another competition again. They had successfully taught me that my passion had no value outside the walls of my sunroom. The news that Prince Alaric of Eldoria was coming to our city sent my mother into a state of ecstatic frenzy. Eldoria was a small, ancient country known for its dramatic landscapes, brooding history, and immense wealth derived from rare earth minerals. The prince was young, unmarried, and famously reclusive. His visit was part of a new diplomatic push, and our city was his first stop. For my mother, this wasn't about international relations, it was the social equivalent of the Super Bowl. My father's company was a major sponsor of the Welcome Gala, which meant our family would be centrally involved. "This is it," my mother declared, her eyes gleaming. "This is the moment that puts our family on the map, truly on the map. Beatrice, you must look your absolute best. A prince. Can you imagine?" Beatrice, for her part, preened under the attention, already planning her wardrobe as if she were auditioning for the role of princess. I was given a simple instruction. "Clara, for heaven's sake, try to look pleasant and stay out of the way." The week of the prince's visit was a blur of meticulously planned events. My family attended every reception, every luncheon, every gallery opening. I was required to be there, a silent shadow in a tasteful dress, smiling pleasantly when introduced and then melting into the wallpaper. The first thing I noticed about Prince Alaric was his silence. He was handsome in a severe, classical way, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold a profound, unshakable sadness. He performed his duties with a flawless, remote courtesy, but he was unresponsive to everything. The city's finest orchestra played a bombastic symphony for him. He sat with perfect stillness, his expression unchanging. A celebrated poet read a rousing epic about our nation's founding. He applauded politely, his eyes distant. At a private dinner at our home, my mother, growing desperate, had hired a string quartet to play light, cheerful Mozart. The prince listened, nodded once when they finished, and said, "Thank you." The two words were so devoid of emotion they seemed to drain the color from the room. My mother was unraveling. Her grand social triumph was turning into a disaster. "What is wrong with him?" she hissed at my father in the kitchen after the dinner. "It's like he's a statue. He's defective. All this effort, all this expense for nothing. He's making us look foolish." I was standing in the hallway and heard every word. The casual cruelty of calling him defective because he wasn't performing to her expectations struck a painful chord deep within me. I felt a strange, unwelcome kinship with this sad, silent prince. I understood what it was like to be in a room full of people and feel utterly alone, to have your inner world completely invisible to those around you. He wasn't defective, he was grieving. I didn't know for what, but I recognized the shape of his sorrow. It was the same shape as the melodies I composed in the sunroom. The final event was the grand gala, the apex of the entire visit. It was held in the city's historic Grand Ballroom, a cavern of marble and crystal chandeliers. My mother was a wreck, her face a mask of strained hospitality. The entertainment for the evening was a world-renowned opera singer, a diva known for her powerful, joyous arias. She took the stage, filled the hall with her magnificent voice, and sang a piece full of triumph and celebration. The audience was enraptured, everyone except Prince Alaric. He sat at the head table, perfectly still, his gaze fixed on some point in the middle distance, a man listening to a language he didn't understand. When the final note faded, he applauded with the same remote courtesy as always. The failure was palpable. The opera singer swept off the stage with a wounded expression. A thick, awkward silence fell over the ballroom. Diplomats shifted in their seats. My mother looked like she was about to faint. In that moment, watching the prince in his gilded cage of sorrow and my mother in her self-made prison of ambition, something inside me broke. It wasn't a loud crack, but a quiet, clean snap. Years of being silenced, of being dismissed, of being told my feelings were too melancholic, too dreary, too much, it all coalesced into a single, overwhelming impulse. I looked at the grand piano on the stage, polished to a mirror shine, sitting empty and silent. It felt like a dare. What would you do if you weren't afraid? The question, a whisper from my grandmother's memory, echoed in my head. I didn't have an answer, so my body decided for me. I stood up. My mother's eyes widened in horror. "Clara, what are you doing?" "Sit down," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. Beatrice grabbed my arm. "Are you insane? You're going to embarrass us all." I pulled my arm away from her grasp, a strength I didn't know I possessed surging through me. I didn't look at them. I didn't look at anyone. My entire world narrowed to the 20-foot walk to that stage. Each step felt both impossibly long and terrifyingly quick. I could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on me, a wave of confused murmurs rippling through the hall. I was a ghost they had all been trained to ignore, and I was suddenly, inexplicably, walking into the light. My legs felt unsteady as I climbed the few steps to the stage. My hands were trembling as I sat on the plush velvet of the piano bench. I looked out at the sea of faces, a blur of jewels and judgment. I saw my mother's face, pale with fury. I saw my father, looking utterly lost. And I saw Prince Alaric. He was looking at me, not with curiosity, but with the same profound emptiness he had shown all night. There was no expectation in his eyes, which was, in a strange way, a comfort. He had already judged the world and found it wanting. He couldn't be disappointed in me. I took a deep breath, the scent of floor wax and old velvet filling my lungs. I closed my eyes and thought of the sunroom, of the dust motes dancing in the afternoon light, of the worn ivory keys of my grandmother's piano. I thought of the feeling of being utterly myself, with no one there to tell me it was wrong. And then I played. I didn't play Mozart or anything cheerful. I didn't play anything they would recognize. I played a piece I had composed just a few weeks prior. In the dead of night, I called it The Empty Room. It wasn't a technically flashy piece. It was slow, spare, and built around a simple, haunting melody that rose and fell like a steady, melancholic breath. It was a piece about the quiet ache of loneliness, about the space left behind by loss, about the feeling of being a spectator to your own life. The notes weren't designed to entertain or impress, they were designed to confess. The music flowed out of me, a torrent of all the things I was never allowed to say. It spoke of the quiet hurt of being overlooked, the deep sorrow of being misunderstood, and the strange, resilient hope that stubbornly persisted underneath it all. As I played, the murmurs in the ballroom died away. The silence that followed wasn't awkward anymore. It was heavy, resonant, and filled with the emotion of the music. It was a shared silence. I poured every bit of my own sadness, my own isolation into those notes, offering it up not as a performance, but as a communion. I was speaking the prince's language. When I played the final, lingering chord, letting it hang in the air until it faded into nothing, the silence held for a long moment. It was so complete it felt sacred. I kept my eyes closed, my heart hammering against my ribs, convinced I had just committed an act of social suicide that would follow my family for generations. Then, a single sound broke the stillness, a sound that was not applause. It was a man's voice, thick with emotion, slightly rough from disuse. "Who composed that?" I opened my eyes. All heads were turned towards the royal table. Prince Alaric was on his feet. His face, which had been a mask of polite indifference all week, was transformed. His eyes were fixed on me, and they were shining with unshed tears. For the first time, he looked truly present. He looked alive. The question hung in the air. The master of ceremonies, flustered, looked at me with a questioning gaze. My throat was dry. I swallowed hard and found my voice, a small, wavering thing. I said. I composed it. The prince took a step towards the stage, his gaze never leaving mine. A tear escaped and traced a path down his cheek. It is the sound of my country, he said, his voice barely more than a whisper, yet it carried across the silent hall. It is the sound of my heart. He walked directly to the stage, moving with a purpose no one had seen from him all week. He ascended the steps and stopped in front of the piano, looking down at me. The entire room held its breath. My mother looked as if she had turned to stone. For years, the prince continued, his voice growing stronger. My advisors have urged me to find a court composer. They bring me artists who write marches and anthems of victory. But we are not a victorious people. We are a people who have endured. Your music, it understands. He looked from me to his aide, a stern-looking man named Mr. Harrison, who now looked completely stunned. "This is her," the prince declared, his voice ringing with royal authority. "This is my composer." He then turned back to me, his sad eyes holding a new light, a flicker of connection. "You will come to Eldoria. You will compose for me. This is not a request." The ballroom erupted into a frenzy of shocked whispers and flashing cameras from the press, who had been cordoned off in the back. My family was frozen in a tableau of disbelief. My mother's mouth was hanging open, her carefully constructed world shattering around her. Beatrice stared at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before, a cocktail of pure, unadulterated envy and confusion. My father simply looked terrified. I felt like I was floating outside my own body, watching a scene from a strange and impossible movie. A prince, a foreign prince, had not only heard me, but he had understood me in a way my own family never had. My dreary, depressing little hobby, the source of their shame and my secret solace, had just become a matter of international diplomacy. Mr. Harrison was already striding towards the stage, his face a mask of professionalism, as he tried to regain control of a situation that had veered wildly off script. In that moment, surrounded by chaos, I felt a stillness inside me. It was the first time in my life I had ever felt truly, completely seen. The rest of the evening was a chaotic blur. Mr. Harrison, the prince's aide, managed to extract us, me, the prince, and my shell-shocked family, from the ballroom and into a private antechamber. The air crackled with tension. My mother, having rebooted from her initial shock, immediately tried to take charge. "Your Highness," she began, her voice a syrupy, artificial version of itself. "We are simply overwhelmed. My daughter Clara has always been so gifted. We've nurtured her talent since she was a little girl. Of course, she would be honored to accept your proposition." She was trying to frame it as a negotiation she was leading, a social victory she had orchestrated. The prince barely looked at her. His attention was still on me. "It is not a proposition, madam," he said, his tone cool and dismissive. "It is a royal appointment." He then turned to me, his expression softening slightly. "My apologies for the public nature of the declaration. When one has been silent for so long, the first words spoken are often too loud, but the sentiment is sincere." I found my voice, though it still felt like it belonged to someone else. "Your Highness, I don't know what to say." Before he could respond, my father stepped forward, clearing his throat nervously. "This will of course require some discussion. Contracts, arrangements. My daughter is not accustomed to such matters. I can handle the particulars on her behalf." He was already seeing it as a business transaction, a deal to be managed. Beatrice, who had been silent until now, finally spoke, her voice tight with a jealousy so potent it was almost visible. "Clara can't just pack up and move to Eldoria. She has a life here." The lie was so blatant it was almost funny. My life consisted of my sunroom, my part-time job at a bookstore, and my weekly coffee with Lena. They had never shown an ounce of interest in my life before, but now that it had suddenly acquired value, they were desperate to claim ownership of it. That was the second snap I felt that night. The first had been defiance. This one was clarity. I looked at their faces, my mother's grasping ambition, my father's transactional anxiety, my sister's bitter envy, and I saw them for exactly what they were. They weren't a family trying to protect me. They were a board of directors trying to manage a suddenly valuable and very surprising asset. A calm I had never known settled over me. I stood up a little straighter. "Thank you for your concern," I said, my voice steady and clear. I looked directly at my mother, then my father, then my sister. "But I will be handling my own arrangements." The shock on their faces was even more profound than it had been in the ballroom. It was one thing for me to play the piano. It was another thing entirely for me to speak for myself against them. "Mr. Harrison," I said, turning to the prince's aide, "perhaps you and I could meet tomorrow to discuss the logistics." Mr. Harrison, a man who I suspected had seen every form of political and personal drama, gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod of approval. "Of course, miss," he said, "I will have my office contact you in the morning to arrange a suitable time and place." He then turned and, with a bow to the prince, expertly began to usher my family out of the room, murmuring about the late hour and the need for rest. My mother tried to resist, sputtering, "But we haven't discussed anything." But Mr. Harrison was a master of polite but firm eviction. The door closed, leaving me alone with Prince Alaric. The silence returned, but this time it was comfortable, peaceful. He gestured to a chair. "Please, sit. You must be overwhelmed." I sank into the plush velvet, my adrenaline finally beginning to ebb, leaving me feeling shaky but strangely solid. "That's one word for it," I managed. He gave a small, sad smile. "They do not understand you," he stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "No," I said quietly, "they don't." "That is a specific kind of loneliness," he said, his gaze distant again. "To be surrounded by people and to have the most important part of you be invisible." He had just perfectly articulated the central theme of my entire existence. In that moment, I knew I would go to Eldoria. It wasn't about the title or the prestige my mother craved. It was about going to a place where I would not be invisible. The next day was a battle of wills. My mother, having regrouped overnight, launched a full-scale assault. She had a list of demands: what my title would be, the size of my living quarters, a dress allowance. She was treating my life like a writer on a concert contract. "We must ensure you are treated with the respect our family deserves," she insisted. "This isn't about respect, Mother," I said, my voice calm. "This is about my music." I was getting ready for my meeting with Mr. Harrison, and she was following me from room to room. "And don't be naive, Clara," she continued, lowering her voice. "This is your chance. A prince. Beatrice was supposed to be the one to make a match like this, but if you play your cards right—" I stopped and turned to face her, my blood running cold. "Is that what you think this is? A matchmaking scheme?" "Don't be foolish," she snapped. "Everything is a matchmaking scheme. You've just stumbled into the most important one of your life. Don't ruin it by being your usual dreary self." The cruelty of it, the sheer transactional nature of her love, was breathtaking. I just looked at her. "I'm leaving," I said, "and I'm going to my meeting alone." I walked out of the house, leaving her standing in the hallway, speechless for the first time in her life. My meeting with Mr. Harrison took place at a quiet hotel suite. He was professional, efficient, and surprisingly kind. He laid out the terms of the offer. It was generous beyond my wildest dreams: a formal title as composer to the royal court, a private apartment within the palace grounds, a handsome stipend, and complete artistic freedom. "His Highness has only one requirement," Mr. Harrison explained: "that you compose what you feel. He is not interested in false celebration or manufactured joy. He wants honesty." As we went through the paperwork, he paused. "If you'll forgive me for speaking personally, Miss, what you did last night was remarkably brave." I looked at him, surprised. "I don't feel brave," I confessed. "I feel terrified." He nodded. "Bravery isn't the absence of fear. His Highness, he carries a great weight. The history of his family, of his country. He lost his mother, the Queen, when he was very young. She was a musician as well, a cellist. When she died, the music in the palace died with her. His father, the king, forbade it. He believed it encouraged a melancholy he wanted to stamp out of his son. Suddenly, it all made sense. The prince's profound sadness, his connection to my music. He hadn't just heard a melody, he had heard an echo of his own loss, of a part of himself that had been silenced. Until last night, Mr. Harrison finished quietly. Last night, for the first time since he was a boy, I saw him truly listen. Armed with that understanding, I went home with a new resolve. I signed the contract without showing it to my parents. I arranged my own passport and travel visa. I began to pack. My family watched me with a mixture of confusion and resentment. My defiance had broken the system. I was no longer playing my assigned part, and they didn't know how to react. Beatrice was the most hostile. She found me in the sunroom, carefully wrapping my grandmother's old sheet music. "You think you're so special now, don't you?" she said, leaning against the doorframe, her arms crossed. "A prince picks you out of a crowd and suddenly you're better than everyone." "I never said that, Bee," I replied, not looking up. "You don't have to," she sneered. "I can't believe this is happening. I did everything right. I went to the right schools, I got the right job, I got the right fiancé. You just sat in here feeling sorry for yourself and you're the one who gets a fairy tale." "It's not a fairy tale," I said, finally meeting her gaze. "He's a sad man who liked a sad song I wrote, that's all." "Don't be so pathetic," she spat. "You've been pathetic your whole life. Don't you see that this is your one chance to not be, and you're shutting us out?" I finally understood. She wasn't angry that I was leaving. She was angry that I was taking my newfound social currency with me, where she couldn't spend it. "My music was never for you," I said softly. "You were right. It was always just for me. And now, it's for him too. You don't have to understand it. You just have to accept it." I turned back to my packing, and for the first time, her words had no power over me. The sunroom had always been my sanctuary, but I was about to discover that it was not a cage, but a chrysalis, and I was finally ready to leave it. I decided to leave 2 weeks later. The day of my departure was a stiff, awkward affair. My father tried to give me a clumsy lecture on financial planning, while my mother gave me a list of influential people in the Eldorian court I should make a point of meeting. It was as if I were being sent off on an extended business trip. Only Lena's farewell felt real. She met me at the airport, pulling me into a fierce hug. "You send me a postcard of your palace, you hear me," she said, her eyes shining with tears of pride. "And you write the saddest, most beautiful music anyone has ever heard." "I will," I promised, hugging her back tightly. "Thank you for always listening." "Are you kidding?" she said, pulling away and grinning. "I'm the one who gets to say I knew you when." As I walked towards the gate, I glanced back. My family was standing in a tight, uncomfortable cluster. They looked small and lost, like people who had just realized the rulebook they had lived by their entire lives was suddenly obsolete. They waved, but their smiles didn't reach their eyes. They weren't watching their daughter leave. They were watching a strategic advantage walk away. And I felt, for the first time, a profound and liberating sense of pity for them. The flight to Eldoria felt like a journey to another century. We flew over jagged, snow-capped mountains and deep, pine-forested valleys before descending towards the capital, a city of elegant gray stone spires and winding, cobbled streets nestled by a deep, dark lake. The air was crisp and clean, tinged with the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. It was a landscape that felt like my music sounded. The palace was not a gilded confection, but an ancient, formidable castle of granite and slate, softened by centuries of ivy. It was beautiful, but in a severe, melancholic way. My apartment was in a quiet wing overlooking a walled garden where white roses grew in disciplined rows. It was spacious and elegant, furnished with dark wood and rich tapestries, and in the center of the main room, waiting for me, was the most beautiful concert grand piano I had ever seen. A note on the music stand, written in elegant, sloped handwriting, said simply, "Welcome home." My life transformed. My days fell into a rhythm dictated not by social obligation, but by inspiration. I would wake early, walk through the quiet palace gardens, and then spend hours at the piano, composing. No one ever told me what to write. No one ever called my music dreary or depressing. I was simply left alone to create. I wrote pieces inspired by the dramatic Eldorian landscape, by the whisper of the wind through the pines, by the stoic, resilient faces of its people. Prince Alaric, whose name I soon came to use, was a quiet, respectful presence. He would not interrupt me while I worked, but in the evenings I would often play for him in one of the grand, echoing salons. He would sit in a high-backed chair, his eyes closed, and just listen. We rarely spoke about the music itself, we didn't need to. It was our shared language. We spoke of other things, of books, of history, of the burden of expectation. I learned that his sadness was not a mood, but a companion, born of immense loss and the crushing weight of a crown he never wanted. He was not a fairy tale prince, but a man trapped in a gilded cage, and my music was, for him, a window. He was a kind, thoughtful man with a dry, understated wit that surfaced on rare occasions. Our relationship was one of quiet, profound friendship, a meeting of two lonely souls who had found solace in a shared melancholy. I had never been happier. Back home, my family was struggling to process my new reality. My sudden elevation had thrown their carefully calibrated social world into chaos. I received letters from my mother filled with not-so-subtle questions about the prince's marital status and breathless accounts of how she was telling everyone about her brilliant daughter, the royal composer. She name-dropped me at every opportunity, my success becoming her new favorite accessory. It was as if my entire life before that night at the gala had been erased. She had rewritten history, casting herself as the supportive matriarch who had always known her quiet daughter was a genius in disguise. It was so transparently false it would have been laughable if it weren't so sad. My father's letters were short and focused on the opportunity this represented. He asked if I had made any connections in the Eldorian Ministry of Trade. Then, about 6 months after I had left, a different kind of letter arrived. It was from Beatrice. Her handwriting, usually so perfect and controlled, was shaky. She wrote that her fiancé had called off the wedding. His family, it turned out, had suffered a massive financial collapse, and the perfect match was no longer perfect. The fallout had been public and humiliating. She wrote of her shock, her shame, and her bewilderment. "I did everything I was supposed to do," she wrote. "I followed all the rules. You broke all of them, and you're the one in a palace. It doesn't make any sense." And then, in a postscript at the bottom of the page, were 3 words that I never thought I would see her write. "I am sorry." It wasn't a complete apology. It didn't erase years of casual cruelty. But it was a crack in the facade. It was the first honest thing she had ever said to me. For the first time, I saw my sister not as a rival or a tormentor, but as someone who was just as trapped in our mother's system as I had been, only in a different way. I had been trapped by dismissal. She had been trapped by expectation. And her cage, it turned out, was just as lonely as mine. A year after my arrival, Prince Alaric announced that Eldoria would host its first international music festival. The centerpiece of the event would be a new symphony, commissioned by the Crown. He asked me to compose it. The symphony, titled The Eldorian Heart, was the most ambitious thing I had ever written. It was a culmination of everything I had felt and learned in my new home. It wasn't a triumphant piece, but a piece about resilience. It had movements of deep sorrow and quiet introspection, but it also had moments of soaring, defiant hope. It was the story of the country, and it was also my own. My family, of course, was invited to the premiere as guests of honor. The thought of seeing them filled me with a quiet dread, a test of my newfound peace. When they arrived, they were different. My mother was still grasping, but there was a new uncertainty in her eyes. My father seemed smaller, more subdued. Beatrice was quiet and watchful. They were in my world now, and the power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. The night of the premiere, the concert hall was filled with dignitaries and critics from all over the world. As I walked onto the stage to take a seat at the piano for my solo part, I saw my family in the royal box, sitting next to the king himself. My mother was practically vibrating with social ecstasy, but I wasn't playing for them. I wasn't playing for the critics or the dignitaries. I was playing for the quiet, sad prince who had heard me when no one else would. I was playing for the little girl who had hidden in a sunroom because her feelings were too much for the world. I was playing for myself. The symphony unfolded, a story in sound. When it reached its final, quiet, hopeful chord, the hall was silent for a beat, and then it erupted. The applause was a tidal wave, a roar of approval and understanding that washed over me. I looked at Prince Alaric, who was standing and leading the ovation, a genuine, unguarded smile on his face. I saw Lena, who had flown in for the occasion, openly weeping in the front row, and I looked at my family. My father was applauding politely, looking bewildered. My mother was crying, though I couldn't tell if her tears were from pride or from the overwhelming social victory she was experiencing. But Beatrice was just looking at me, and in her eyes, for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine understanding, not of the music, perhaps, but of me. She finally saw me. My vindication was not in the applause or the title or the palace. It was in that quiet moment of recognition and in the profound, unshakable knowledge that my dreary little hobby hadn't just saved a prince, it had saved me. In the years that followed, my life settled into a beautiful, quiet rhythm. I remained in Eldoria, my home. My friendship with Alaric deepened into a familial bond, two kindred spirits who understood the value of a comfortable silence. The music festival became an annual tradition, a beacon for artists who, like me, had something to say that couldn't be spoken in words. My relationship with my family found a new, strange equilibrium. My mother never stopped bragging, but her words were like the weather present, but not something that affected my climate. My father and I spoke occasionally, our conversations still stilted, but he no longer tried to manage my life, and Beatrice and I began a slow, careful correspondence. We started to build something new, something tentative and fragile, but something real. She was finding her own path away from our mother's blueprint, and for the first time we were becoming not rivals, but sisters. I learned that my worth was never determined by their validation, or lack thereof. It had always been there, in the quiet sunroom, waiting for me to be brave enough to claim it for myself. The world may not have valued my music, but I did, and in the end, that was the only applause that ever truly mattered. My story is a testament to the fact that your value is not a reflection of how others see you. It's something inherent, something that you cultivate in the quiet moments when you are being most true to yourself. So I want to leave you with this thought. Don't ever let anyone call your passion a dreary pastime. The world is full of noise, but the things that truly matter often speak in a whisper. You just have to be brave enough to listen. Have you ever had a passion that others dismissed, only to have it become a source of strength or success? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to read them. Don't forget to like this video if my journey resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories about finding your own voice. Thank you for listening to me today. I hope my story inspires you to honor the music within yourself, no matter how melancholic it may sound to others.